Chapter 1. The Ghosts of King's Cross. The first snowfall of the season dusted the platform at King's Cross, like a secret waiting to be unearthed. Trains hissed, platforms echoed with footsteps, and newspaper vendors shouted headlines that no one truly listened to. In the corner cafe, Bruce Reynolds stirred a lukewarm tea, watching people pass. He wasn't dressed to impress. Brown trench coat, tailored but unassuming, cap tilted forward, just enough to shade his eyes. Around him, the world moved with the dull rhythm of a London morning. It was December 1962. He looked up as his reflection flickered in the window. He barely recognized himself these days. A smuggler, a thief, a planner. But above all, a man who was tired of scraping crumbs. He had tasted enough of the underground to know the currency wasn't money. It was control. That's what he wanted now. Control. Precision. One last job. And he had just the idea. Across from him sat Gordon Goody, sharp-jawed, quieter than most, with eyes like twin razors. He didn't fidget. He didn't speak unless it mattered. "You sure this isn't too big?" Gordon asked, finally. "Post office trains? You're talking about hitting the heart of the country, Bruce." Bruce nodded. "That's the point. No one expects it. No one's stupid enough to try. Which is why we have to." He pulled out a leather folio, worn and heavy with maps, schedules, personnel rotations. He tapped a photo of the Royal Mail's traveling post office train. It ran from Glasgow to Euston almost every night. Inside, millions of pounds in used banknotes being retired untraceable. A moving vault, lightly guarded, predictable. We stop the train. We offload the loot. We vanish. He said it like it was routine. Gordon raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Bruce responded. What Bruce didn't say was that he had already begun recruiting. 2 weeks earlier, in a lock-up garage off a forgotten street in Soho, Bruce had met with a man known only as the Ulster Man. No name, no past, just knowledge. A former railway worker, disgruntled, maybe even dangerous but brilliant. He knew the routes, the schedules, the signaling systems. He spoke in curt sentences, often while chain-smoking, but his grasp of the network was unnerving. "This signal here," the Ulster Man had said, stabbing a finger at a junction near Leighton Buzzard. "Tamper with this one, and the train thinks it has a red. It'll stop, and that's where you hit it." Bruce had nodded. "We'll need someone to actually rig the signal." The Ulsterman's cigarette bobbed in his mouth. "I've got the man." It was as if the job had started pulling the right people in, like magnets finding their poles. Back at King's Cross, Gordon sipped his tea, now cold. "You thinking cash or bullion?" "Cash," Bruce answered. "No markings. Easier to launder. But we'll need a crew." "A big one." Bruce hesitated. 15. Maybe more. Gordon blinked. "That's a bloody army. It's a bloody train." They sat in silence. The steam of the city buzzed around them like smoke before a fire. In Bruce's chest, something stirred. Not adrenaline, not yet, but the certainty that this was it. His masterpiece. His Mona Lisa, if it had been drawn with wire cutters and a timetable. Later that night, Bruce returned home to his modest semi-detached in Surrey. Frances, his wife, was finishing up a letter, her hair tied back with the elegance of someone who could have had a quieter life. "You were out late," she said, not looking up. He kissed her cheek. "Met with Gordon." "About?" He smiled faintly. "Just a job. Might be the last one." She looked at him now. "Will it make us free?" "I think it might." She didn't ask more. Francis had always understood that loving Bruce Reynolds meant living between the lines. Upstairs, Bruce opened a drawer and pulled out a folder labeled simply, Houston. Inside was everything: targets, names, train specs, and at the very back, a single page with 3 words written in pencil: the great job. 2 days later, the next domino fell into place. Buster Edwards arrived from Kent, smelling faintly of whiskey and mischief. A former boxer turned nightclub owner, Buster had charm in buckets and fists like hammers. He greeted Bruce and Gordon like long-lost brothers. "Heard there's something cooking," Buster said. "There is," Bruce replied, "and it's going to be loud." "I like loud." Within hours, they were joined by Charlie Wilson, cool-headed, methodical, with a stare that could curdle milk. Charlie didn't waste words. He opened the plans, scanned the maps, and said, "We'll need muscle. Serious muscle." "I've got a few in mind," Bruce replied. "And a safe house. An old farm. Off-grid. Remote." Charlie smirked. "You've been busy. You don't plan a job like this casually." By week's end, the team began to take shape like a machine assembling itself. Roger Cordry, Tommy Wisby, Roy James, the getaway driver who could outsteer a tornado. Each man brought something, and each man would be asked to gamble everything. One snowy afternoon, the team convened at the farm Bruce had mentioned, a property tucked into the trees near Oakley, Bedfordshire. It smelled of hay, diesel, and tension. Inside, a long table was set. No food, just maps and mugs of black tea. Bruce stood at the head. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This is the Royal Mail Traveling Post Office. We stop it near Ledburn. We offload the money. We disappear. No names. No mistakes. We do this right, and we walk with over £2 million. Someone whistled. Another muttered, "Bloody hell." Bruce continued, "This isn't a smash and grab. This is war. Quiet war. We're soldiers with brains. No one gets hurt. We do this clean. We're gentlemen thieves." Roy James leaned forward. "And what if it goes sideways?" Bruce didn't blink. "Then we adapt. And if we can't, we vanish." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was wind in the rafters. Then Buster clapped his hands. "Let's steal a train, then." Laughter broke the tension. Plans were drawn, roles assigned, every man with a purpose. But even as the crew smiled, even as Bruce looked around with pride at the finest team he'd ever assembled, he felt it. A shadow. The first ghost. Because planning a robbery is like digging up something buried. You don't always know what you'll unleash. And some trains, once stopped, never start again. Chapter 2: The Last Signal. The Ulsterman's instructions were terrifying in their simplicity. Change the signal and the train stops. It was February now. The wind had teeth, and the countryside roads in Buckinghamshire were slick with black frost. Bruce, Gordon, and Buster had driven north in a Ford Zephyr, its heater coughing cold breath into the cabin. The destination? A remote crossing near Sears Lane, just outside the small hamlet of Ledburn. The precise spot where the Royal Mail train would be most vulnerable. They parked near a thicket of trees, eyes scanning for witnesses. "Here," the Ulsterman said, pointing to a small wooden box buried beside the line. "This controls the home signal. You force a red here, and the driver will hit the brakes. Guaranteed." Bruce crouched beside it, brushing snow off the housing. It looked harmless, obsolete, the kind of thing a railway worker might pass without a second thought. "Once we pull the fuse and rewire it," the Ulsterman said, It's yours to command. Red light, dead stop. Gordon looked up the line. And then you'd better be fast. The farm became the operations command center. They called it Leatherslade, a lonely two-story house with barns, a generator, and enough room to vanish inside. They filled the cellar with maps, the loft with rope and gloves, and the barn with stolen radios and false license plates. It was never a hideout. It was a launch pad. Each man had his role. Charlie Wilson and Gordon ran logistics. Roy James mapped out getaway routes with terrifying precision, timing every turn and estimating escape times down to the second. Buster handled morale, keeping tensions low with jokes and flasks passed around at night. Bruce watched it all, like a conductor studying an orchestra. Every cough, every whisper, every shiver in the wind. He logged it. And still, he couldn't sleep. Because this wasn't just a job. This was legacy. And the legacy had to be perfect. 3 nights later, they staged a full dry run. Using a stolen army truck and fake parcels, they rehearsed loading and unloading, timing everything. Roger Cordry, ex-engineer and radio expert, simulated cutting the lines. Tommy Wisby practiced moving bags from the train to the truck. Everyone moved like ghosts in silence. 22 minutes. That's not good enough, Bruce said. We shave 5. No more. But Buster began. Bruce shook his head. 5. They drilled again and again. The coal bit into their knuckles. Tempers frayed. But by the 5th attempt, they did it in 15. It was possible. They could rob the train. What Bruce hadn't planned for was the signalman. The Royal Mail train was driven by a man named Jack Mills, seasoned, reliable. But with him that night would be David Whitby, the young fireman. Whitby was fit, quick-thinking, and suspicious by nature. If that lad sees something odd, Charlie said, he'll raise hell. Bruce sighed. Then we have to be faster than hell. They drew up contingencies. Extra men on the front coach. Ropes to secure the signal box. Masks made of stockings. Everyone was to wear gloves, overalls, no jewelry, nothing that could identify them. Even their language was rehearsed. Stop the engine. Hands where I can see. No one gets hurt. Clean. Surgical. Professional. It was August 7th when Bruce called the final meeting. 15 men sat around the long wooden table in Leatherslade Farm's loft, each with a tea or flask in hand. Bruce stood at the head. This is it, he said. He unfolded a single map. The Royal Mail's route from Glasgow. The stretch near Ledburn. The stopping point. The barn. The road south to London. Tomorrow night we go. Everything is in place. Signals, transport, farm, and most importantly, us. He paused. Some of you are here because you're tired of scraping. Some because you owe. Some because you're hungry. But we all share one thing. We don't want to be nobodies anymore. He looked around the room. You pull this off, you'll never be forgotten. Win or lose. Jail or free. History. The room was still. No jokes. No boasts. Just fire in their eyes. On August 8, 1963, just after 3 a.m., the Royal Mail train left Leighton Buzzard, heavy with cash. Over £2.6 million inside. That's over £50 million today. Ahead, near Sears Lane, a home signal glowed red. Jack Mills, the driver, blinked, slowed, then began to brake. David Whitby leaned out, confused. There were no scheduled stops here. Then the secondary signal went red too. What the hell? He began. The train rolled to a halt. And from the trees, like ghosts from a mist, the crew emerged. Black overalls, stockings over faces, tools in hand. Roy and Charlie took the cab. They opened the door fast, flooding the cab with cold air and confusion. "Stay calm," one barked. "We don't want trouble." Jack Mills resisted, so Buster struck him. A single blow, not meant to kill, just to control. Mills collapsed, dazed. Whitby shouted, but hands grabbed him, pulling him out, tying his wrists. "No one dies tonight," Bruce growled. "But no one disobeys either." They moved like a swarm. Roger cut the phone lines. Tommy and Roy unhooked the engine from the back coaches, separating the money-filled carriages from the rest. And then, with Charlie now driving, they moved the front segment half a mile up the track, right to the waiting bridge. Bridego Bridge, the extraction point. Within minutes, the bags began to fly. Brown leather pouches filled with cash, hundreds of them, passed hand to hand like a factory line. Into the waiting truck, into the second. Every movement choreographed. Bruce oversaw it all, stopwatch in hand. 14 minutes. Keep moving. Gordon grabbed 4 bags at once. Roy shouted for the side hatch. Buster laughed, adrenaline roaring through him. Even Tommy smiled. "We're doing it. We're doing the bloody job." Bruce didn't smile. Not yet. Because it wasn't over. Not until they vanished. 15 minutes later, 2 trucks and a car vanished into the misty countryside. Behind them, the Royal Mail train sat cold and half-empty, its signal box rewired, its driver unconscious but breathing, and its guards tied and bewildered. By dawn, news would ripple out. By morning, it would hit headlines. But by then, Bruce Reynolds and his team would be gone, and the greatest train robbery in British history would be done. Chapter 3, Cracks in the Silence. Dawn broke quietly over Buckinghamshire, draping the hedgerows and fields in honey-colored light. The birds sang, the world stirred. And yet, by the time the first farmer passed the empty tracks near Sears Lane, he knew something was wrong. The train was sitting too still, too silent. And then came the screams from the cab. Jack Mills, dazed but conscious, stumbled into view, his head bleeding. The radio was dead. The signal lights were still red. And the Royal Mail, one of Britain's most secure and punctual operations, had been robbed blind. Back at Leatherslade Farm, Bruce Reynolds stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring out at the morning mist. A cigarette hung loosely from his lips. In his hands, a mug of strong tea. Cold by now. The others were still asleep or resting, some upstairs, some crashed out in the barn on sleeping bags and folded coats. Roy James had curled up in the truck cabin, still gripping the steering wheel like it might disappear. Gordon snored lightly from the loft. 15 men, 2.6 million pounds richer. Yet none of them looked like winners. Adrenaline had been replaced with silence. Excitement with exhaustion. The heist had gone off nearly flawlessly. Just one blow to a driver's head, a few minor hiccups, and one missing money bag. But Bruce knew better than to celebrate too soon. This was the most dangerous part of all. By noon, every paper in Britain screamed the same thing. Gang escapes with millions in train raid. Robbers vanish into the night. Biggest cash heist in UK history. Police were mobilized from London to Glasgow. Scotland Yard dispatched its flying squad. Local officers scoured the area. Helicopters hovered over farmland. Every guest house, caravan park, and farmhouse was questioned. In London, Home Secretary Henry Brooke was briefed personally. At Leatherslade, Bruce gathered the crew again. No one leaves. No phones. No radio. Burn your clothes. Gloves, shoes, everything. This place is invisible. It stays that way. Buster looked uncomfortable. How long we holding up here? A week. Maybe 10 days. That long? Bruce nodded. Police will think we scattered. The longer we stay quiet, the more they'll chase ghosts. Tommy Wisby grunted. I don't like sitting. It's unnatural. You like prison better? No one answered. That night, they counted the money. Bag by bag. Note by note. Face after face of Queen Elizabeth stared up from the floor like a wall of judgment. 2.6 million pounds, just as expected. Mostly used notes. Untraceable. Bruce felt the weight of it, not just in his hands, but in his chest. This is it, he said aloud. Freedom. A life on our terms. Roy laughed. And how exactly do we spend it without ending up in a clink? That was the question, wasn't it? Bruce had a plan, of course. Contacts, laundering channels, buyers in Antwerp and Marseilles. But that wasn't for today. Today, they were rich. Tomorrow, they would become hunted. The first crack appeared on day 4. One of the young lookouts, Jimmy, a new lad from South London, snuck out after dark. He walked 2 miles to a phone booth and rang his girlfriend. He didn't say much, just that he was safe, that things were good. He didn't know the line was tapped. He didn't know the girl's flat had been watched ever since the papers hinted a London gang might be involved. The call was traced. Not exact, but close. The police redoubled their search in Bedfordshire. And the countdown began. Bruce was furious. You jeopardized the whole bloody job for what? A voice on the other end of the line. Jimmy stammered. She's pregnant. I had to. Bruce cut him off. You're done. They bundled Jimmy into a van that night and dropped him in a market square near Watford. No money. No name. You talk, Gordon said flatly. You don't just kill yourself. You kill us all. Jimmy nodded, then walked off into the night, tears on his cheeks. Bruce didn't sleep at all after that. By day 6, the tension was a razor wire stretched across every room. Charlie Wilson began arguing with Roy. Roger refused to eat the tinned beans anymore. Buster drank more than usual. Even Gordon stopped making jokes. The farm, once a hideout, now felt like a tomb. On the radio, reports said police were expanding their search door to door. They knew the general area, and eventually someone would find a footprint, a wrapper, a trail. Bruce knew it. We go tonight, he said finally. We split. Burn the maps. Wipe every surface. The cash goes to 3 locations. We regroup in 3 weeks. France. Then Spain. Then freedom. No one cheered. They just nodded. That night, they dismantled the camp. They poured bleach on the floors, torched the clothes, cleaned fingerprints. One man even suggested burning the entire house, but Bruce refused. That would raise suspicion. Instead, they left it quietly, like ghosts. 3 trucks, 15 men, hundreds of thousands in hidden compartments. They drove into the countryside, swallowed by night and fog. By morning, Leatherslade Farm stood empty, silent, waiting to be discovered. And it was. On August 13th, just 5 days after the heist, a tip from a local gamekeeper led police to the farm. Inside, they found discarded food tins, scorched gloves, a Monopoly board with real banknotes used for play, fingerprints, dozens of them, and a receipt from a local grocer. That was all it took. The hunt was on. Chapter 4, The Manhunt begins. London. Scotland Yard. Detective Superintendent Tommy Butler sat with his sleeves rolled up and a grim smile on his face. The press had dubbed him the Quiet Man, a stark contrast to the boisterous gangsters he hunted. But those who knew him understood that he was methodical, tireless, and cold as January steel. The discovery of Leatherslade Farm had lit a fuse in Butler's brain. "There's no way 15 men vanished without help," he told his team. "And no way they thought they'd get away with it forever." He pointed to the map on the wall, a red pin jammed into the area around Sears Lane and another in Oakley, where the gamekeeper had reported strange goings-on. These men lived here, ate here, slept here. They left fingerprints. That's a start. But we need more: names, photos, sightings. Get to work. The squad moved fast. Within hours, the prints were sent to every force in the country. Photographs of known associates of Bruce Reynolds and Charlie Wilson were circulated. Informants in Soho and East End pubs were questioned. Wives and mistresses were followed. The press fed the frenzy. "These men are not amateurs," Butler said to a newsreel crew. "But we will find them. Every last one." In a flat in Kensington, Bruce Reynolds sat alone with a glass of scotch, watching the news coverage flicker on a borrowed black and white television. His face, once lean and sharp, had grown thinner. The pressure was beginning to show. It wasn't just the heist. It was the aftershock. The fear that any knock at the door might be final, that any street corner could bring handcuffs. He had money, enough to disappear forever. And yet, even now, he hesitated. Buster Edwards called from a pub in Fulham that afternoon, speaking in code. "You seen the sky?" Bruce gritted his teeth. "Clouds are rolling in. We need an umbrella, mate." They agreed to meet in 3 days in Paris, if they could get out. Charlie Wilson didn't even try. He'd returned to his family estate in Kent, acting like nothing had happened. He was defiant. His plan was simple: hide in plain sight, let the dust settle, wait for the heat to move on. But Butler was already on his trail. One fingerprint at the farm had matched Charlie's from a long-ago assault charge. That was all the excuse Butler needed. Wilson was arrested at dawn. He answered the door in a silk robe, cigarette dangling, a grin on his face. "Took you long enough." The news hit like a thunderclap. Train robber captured. In Soho bars, whispers grew louder. Bruce knew time was bleeding away. He booked passage for himself, his wife Angela, and their baby son using false documents. The plan was to vanish into Europe, France first, then Spain, and eventually to South America. Roy James and Gordon Goody would follow, each with their own exits. But it wasn't that easy. The police were now watching every port, every airport. Scotland Yard had put Bruce's name on every customs bulletin. He was a ghost, but not invisible. Roger Corddry, the radio man, cracked next. He'd gone to Bournemouth, hiding with his girlfriend's family. But when the police pulled over his car, an innocuous green Austin, he panicked. Tried to bluff his way through. They found cash in the boot. Too much. He confessed within hours. Names, locations, vehicles. It wasn't the full story, but it was enough to unravel the edge of the crew. Back in London, Bruce burned every address book and contact card he had. He moved from flat to flat, always one step ahead. He couldn't call his mother. He couldn't see his son. He couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. The money began to feel like a curse. He caught glimpses of his own face on newspaper covers. Wanted, the brain behind the Great Train Robbery. He was no longer Bruce Reynolds. He was a myth, a shadow. and the walls were closing in. Butler wasn't content with arrests. He wanted everyone. Day after day, the team raided homes, warehouses, pubs, and docks. They turned informants against each other. They cut deals in back alleys. Even old enemies of the crew were now eager to provide information, hoping for favors from the yard. Slowly, the gang fell. Tommy Wisby, Jimmy Hussey, Bob Welch, even Roy James, the getaway driver, was captured after a high-speed chase that ended with him crashing into a fruit cart in London. One by one, they were marched before the press, cuffed and scowling. All except Bruce. Bruce was smoke. And then, the unexpected happened. Ronnie Biggs, cheeky, impulsive, and famously ill-suited to life underground, got careless. He moved back to his own flat. When Butler got the tip, he couldn't believe it. After all that, he said, he goes home. Biggs was arrested in his bathrobe, half asleep. He barely resisted. Honestly, he said, I thought I had more time. By the end of the year, 10 of the 15 had been captured. The trials were set. A media circus was promised. Public opinion divided sharply. Some viewed the gang as daring Robin Hoods, others as violent criminals who had endangered lives and stolen from the Queen herself. Bruce watched the world from afar now, moving through France with counterfeit papers, using safe houses arranged by old smuggling contacts. He still had over £150,000 hidden in a Paris bank. But it didn't feel like wealth. It felt like blood money. One night in a cheap Marseille flat, Angela asked him the question that had been hovering between them since the beginning. When does it end? Bruce looked out the window at the harbor lights, cigarette glowing like a heartbeat. When we stop running. She touched his arm. And when's that? Bruce didn't answer, because he didn't know. Chapter 5. The Trial of the Century. Courtroom number 1 at Aylesbury Crown Court was packed wall to wall. Reporters fought for space in the gallery. Photographers swarmed the steps outside, and onlookers gathered in silence to catch even a glimpse of the now infamous men. The Great Train Robbery had captivated the country, and now the drama turned from the rails to the court. 15 men were originally involved. 10 were now standing trial. The Crown was determined to make an example of them. They would not go lightly. The accused were paraded in under heavy police escort, each man shackled, each face hardened from weeks behind bars. Charlie Wilson sat stiffly in the dock, expression unreadable. Roy James leaned forward, pale but composed. Tommy Wisby, ever the cynic, smirked at the cameras as he entered. And Ronnie Biggs? He looked like he was still hoping for a joke that hadn't landed. The charges read like the plot of a Hollywood script: conspiracy, armed robbery, assault, interference with the Royal Mail. There were no guilty pleas. Each man pleaded not guilty, and the trial began. The prosecution, led by Gerald R. Upjohn QC, wasted no time painting the gang as ruthless criminals. He laid out the evidence: the signal tampering, the assault on driver Jack Mills, the stolen train cars, and the daring getaway. Fingerprints from Leatherslade Farm were matched. Receipts from local shops were presented. Surveillance photographs from before the heist showed several of the men meeting in suspicious locations. Upjohn's tone was cold, clinical, and unrelenting. These were not gentlemen. These were military-grade criminals with precise, cold-blooded planning. The defense, on the other hand, could do little but poke holes where they could. How solid was the fingerprint chain of custody? Could the identification of the men be relied upon? Were the confessions coerced? Despite their efforts, it was an uphill battle. Meanwhile, The public was divided. On the streets of London and Manchester, people argued in pubs and trains. Asterisk, were they criminals or folk heroes? Asterisk. To some, Bruce Reynolds, still at large, had become a legend. They called him the Phantom of the Heist. Women claimed to have dated him. Men bragged about playing cards with him. But inside the courtroom, the mood was far less romantic. Jack Mills, still recovering from the trauma of being struck, testified under guard. "I was doing my job," he said, voice trembling, "and they hit me like I was nothing." The weight of his words hung in the air. Even some jurors shifted uncomfortably. Over 6 weeks, the trial unfolded like a theater piece, complete with villains, drama, betrayal, and intrigue. Roger Corddry turned crown witness. His deal, a reduced sentence for cooperation. His testimony stunned the court, detailing not only the planning, but naming each role played by the others. He was the driver. That one carried the cash bags. That one stood guard. Gasps filled the gallery. Defense barristers protested, but it was clear. The walls were closing in. In an offhand comment to a prison guard, Biggs muttered, "We should have left him in the bloody woods." On the final day, Upjohn stood before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, if these men are not guilty, then crime in this country has no limits. This was no accident, no impulse. It was a military operation designed to steal from Her Majesty's mail and nearly kill a man in the process. If we excuse this, we invite chaos." The jury took less than 24 hours. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Sentencing was swift and brutal. Judge Edmund Davies looked down on the dock, face like granite. "You may have thought yourselves clever, but cleverness without conscience is nothing more than villainy. You violated the trust of an entire nation. You endangered lives. You abused your freedom." Charlie Wilson, 30 years. Roy James, 30 years. Tommy Wisby, 30 years. Ronnie Biggs, 30 years. Others received sentences ranging from 25 to 30 years, depending on involvement. Gasps echoed. Mothers wept. Some of the convicted simply stared ahead, blank-faced. Others whispered curses under their breath. One shouted, "This is a political sentence." Perhaps it was, but it stuck. The headlines the next morning screamed, 30 years for train robbers, justice or overkill. Judge throws the book, longest sentences in British history. Where is Bruce Reynolds? That question loomed larger than ever. While 10 men sat in jail cells that night, Bruce walked the streets of Barcelona under a new name, passport in hand, money hidden in offshore accounts. Angela and his son were with him. He had pulled off the greatest robbery of the century and disappeared. But freedom didn't feel like he thought it would. In Brixton Prison, Wilson and Biggs were already plotting. "We're not sitting here for 30 years, Wilson said, voice low. Biggs nodded. "Then we better start planning now." The heist was over. But the legend? The legend was just beginning. Chapter 6, The Great Escape. Spring 1965. 2 years had passed since the thunderous verdict at Aylesbury Crown Court, but inside the cold gray walls of HMP Wandsworth, time moved differently. For Ronnie Biggs, it had become a dull metronome of routines, head counts, and scraped knees against stone floors. He was restless, angry, not built for confinement. His 30-year sentence stretched before him like a noose, and he had no intention of wearing it. Charlie Wilson, imprisoned in Winson Green, was already whispering to the right people. His charisma hadn't dimmed in captivity. If anything, it had become sharper, more focused. He walked the prison with a smirk, his eyes always scanning. "You can't keep men like us caged for life," he said one day to an ex-boxer turned smuggler. "We built an empire. We can build an exit." And quietly, plans were set in motion. For both of them, Ronnie Biggs' opportunity came first. A loose-limbed carpenter named Paul Seaborn had befriended him. Not a criminal by trade, but a romantic. A man who believed in causes, legends, and underdogs. Biggs was the perfect myth to follow. One night, under the veil of a cloudy sky and a sloppily thrown blanket over a perimeter floodlight, a rope ladder was dropped over the prison wall. Biggs, lean from months of push-ups and desperation, scaled it in seconds. Seaborn waited with a van running, engine coughing smoke into the night. Within minutes, Biggs was gone, into the streets of South London, into the shadows. By the time the guards discovered his absence, the trail had gone cold. The newspapers exploded. Biggs bolts. Train robber escapes Wandsworth. Scotland Yard embarrassed as robber vanishes again. The government was livid. Pressure mounted. Interpol was involved. But Ronnie Biggs was already beyond their grasp. By the end of the month, he was in Paris. A few weeks later, under the alias Michael Haynes, he was aboard a boat to Australia. He would disappear into the back streets of Melbourne and later, the beaches of Brazil. He would become the world's most famous fugitive. And the myth of the Great Train Robbery only grew. Meanwhile, Charlie Wilson played a slower, more dangerous game. From inside Winson Green, he bribed guards, tested routines, and analyzed weaknesses like a military strategist. He made contact with a Dutch mercenary named Herman. No questions asked. High price. Total efficiency. On a warm August evening in 1966, a black van pulled up to the prison's rear gate. Inside, Herman and two hired men brandished silenced pistols and cold stares. They cut the lock like it was paper. The job took 7 minutes. Charlie Wilson was out. A ghost once again. Scotland Yard was reeling. 2 of their highest profile convicts gone. And Bruce Reynolds, the man who started it all, still at large. Pressure poured in from Parliament, the Home Office, even the Queen's own advisors. Tommy Butler returned from partial retirement. His mission, bring Reynolds Indiana, no matter what it takes. And Bruce? He was living quietly in Tossa de Mar, a Spanish fishing village on the Costa Brava. Sun-drenched and sleepy. The perfect hideaway. Angela was weary. Their son, Nicky, now a toddler, played in the sand with locals. Bruce watched them with a complex ache, part love, part fear, part guilt. He missed England, the rain, the pub noise, even the black cabs. But he knew he couldn't return. He was the most wanted man in Britain. And sooner or later, the world would get smaller. He moved to Mexico City next. An old smuggler friend helped him settle. The streets were hot and hectic. The days punctuated by the cries of hawkers and the scent of petrol. Money was starting to run low. Bank transfers were risky. Half his fortune was frozen in Swiss accounts under dead aliases. He toyed with writing a book, but the words never came. Just memories. Back in Britain, the remaining gang members served their sentences quietly. A few tried appeals. Most failed. Tommy Wisby spent long days sketching in prison notebooks, drawing steam trains with a strange nostalgia. Roy James, the getaway driver, began racing again, on foot in the yard. He told other inmates, "When I'm out, I'm going to win the Grand Prix." Dreams kept them alive. Time did not. Years passed. Biggs settled in Rio de Janeiro, marrying a Brazilian woman and fathering a child. He lived in relative comfort, selling stories to journalists, posing for photos, becoming both a fugitive and a celebrity. He made the most of exile. Bruce, however, grew increasingly solitary. Angela left in the 1970s, taking Nicky back to England. Bruce wandered from Mexico to Canada, then back to Spain. By the early 80s, the money had nearly dried up. His identity was frayed. He was tired of running. And so in 1981, nearly 2 decades after the greatest robbery in British history, Bruce Reynolds returned. He walked into Scotland Yard on a foggy March morning, wearing a suit that hung a little loose, hair grayer, eyes darker. "I believe you've been looking for me," he said. The desk sergeant stared, stunned. It was over. Chapter 7: Return of the Mastermind. The sergeant at Scotland Yard stood frozen, a clipboard in his hand and disbelief in his eyes. You're Bruce Reynolds?" Bruce gave a small nod. "Reckon I've been on your list long enough." His voice was tired, but composed. Calm, almost defiant. The sergeant hit the call button. Moments later, the lobby swarmed with suits and plainclothes officers, some of them too young to have remembered the heist firsthand, but all of them recognizing the man in front of them. The ghost had come home. Interrogation began immediately. For the press, it was a storm. Reynolds walks in. Train robber surrenders after 19 years. The brain returns. Why now? "He knew it was time," says source at Scotland Yard. In reality, Bruce didn't say much. He'd come prepared, not to confess, but to control the narrative. "It's all in the past now," he told the detectives. "I've served my sentence every day in exile. You lot just didn't know it." Tommy Butler had passed away years before. Others in the yard were new to the game, but not foolish. They knew Bruce wasn't back out of guilt. He was back because he was out of options. The money was gone. The network scattered. He wanted to write to see his son again, to end the running. Eventually, he was charged and sentenced. 10 years. He served 6. Inside the walls of HMP Maidstone, Bruce became something of a celebrity. Younger inmates treated him like a legend, even a mentor. He kept to himself mostly, scribbling notes, drafting pages of a book he'd promised himself he'd one day publish. He received letters from all over the world, some from fans, some from old allies, some from people whose lives were touched by the mythology of it all. The train robbery had become part of British folklore. He was its architect. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew was moving through the slow wheel of time. Charlie Wilson, after his daring escape, had vanished into Canada and then into South America. He was living large again. Rumors placed him in the drug trade, though nothing was confirmed. In 1990, in a quiet suburb of Marbella, Spain, a hitman walked up to Charlie as he sat drinking coffee outside his villa and shot him twice in the head. No suspects were ever arrested. Many said it was a score from the Colombian cartels. Others said it was karma. Bruce heard the news in his cell and didn't say a word for 2 days. Ronnie Biggs, ever the showman, continued to thrive in Brazil. He made headlines, gave interviews, released music with punk bands. He was untouchable, protected by Brazil's refusal to extradite the father of a Brazilian citizen. But as the years wore on, his health deteriorated. In 2001, old and ailing, he expressed his desire to return to the UK. "I want to die in England," he said. He surrendered, much like Bruce had, in a blaze of headlines and debate. He was imprisoned, released in 2009 on compassionate grounds, and died in 2013 at the age of 84. Even in death, he made the front page. Bruce Reynolds was released in 1988. He walked out of prison quieter than he'd entered. No fanfare, no press conference, just a worn coat, a half-filled notebook, and an appointment with a publisher. He tried to write his story, but the world had moved on. His version clashed with the myth. Everyone wanted drama. He gave them honesty instead. His book, The Autobiography of a Thief, was published in the early 90s. It sold modestly. In interviews, he reflected on the robbery not with pride, but with complexity. It was never about hurting anyone. It was about doing the impossible. We knew it would come down one day. Everything does. The money? It was long gone. Most of it had been spent in exile, used to bribe, to travel, to live. Some of the crew buried portions of their cut, but inflation and time rendered it useless. The treasure that had shocked Britain in 1963 had vanished like smoke. For all their planning, for all their daring, most of the men lived out their days modestly, haunted or forgotten. And what of the public? To some, they remained villains, dangerous criminals who attacked a working-class train crew and tried to outsmart justice. To others, they were legends, folk heroes who exposed the vulnerability of the system with style and restraint. The truth lived somewhere in between. Jack Mills, the train driver, never fully recovered from the assault. His health declined rapidly after the robbery. He died in 1970, and many still debate whether his death should have been counted among the heist victims. His family never forgave the gang, not even Bruce. Bruce Reynolds died in 2013 at the age of 81. He passed quietly in a small flat in Croydon, surrounded by family and a few of the men who still called him boss. His final days were filled with silence, memory, and the knowledge that his name had etched itself permanently into British history. The Great Train Robbery wasn't just a crime. It was a mirror held up to post-war Britain, brilliant, flawed, brash, and changing fast. It asked a nation who its heroes really were, and whether sometimes it was the villains who wrote the most unforgettable stories. Epilogue: The Last Letter. In a dusty file in the National Archives, sealed and marked confidential, TOB opened 50 years post-sentencing, lies a letter written by Bruce Reynolds in 1988 on the day of his release from prison. It reads, "To whomever opens this, if this letter finds the light of day, I hope the story has been told honestly, not just in glamour or condemnation, but in truth. We were not heroes, but neither were we monsters. We were dreamers. And on one night in August, with a lantern, a plan, and a train full of money, we dreamed loud enough that the whole world heard us. Let the story be told not for the money we took, but for the lines we crossed. Yours in memory and mischief, BR." The tracks are long gone now, but the story? Still racing through history like a train that never stops.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed this crime story. If you've got a theory, memory, or favorite part of this heist, drop it in the comments. We read every single one. If you're into real crime and strange heists, and the kinds of stories they never tell you about in school, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell, because we got a vault full of jaw-dropping stories coming your way. Check out more stories like this.